guys present our idea and then read it and let's do it professionally and we want to
Well, basically, if this is what I think that she wants to do, is like, okay, group them together, so you can get one person walking on this little area of kids and then figure it out and then get down to that.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Let me make sure everybody's on mute.
Data eliminations that we can do to get down to this. Right.
Now, of course, we're getting feedback.
Read.
Hey, Sarah and Pam, I think we've got audio on your end. If you guys can mute yourselves real quickly. That would be great. Awesome. There we go. I think we're good to go. All right, folks, welcome to the next installment of the Higher Education Financial Wellness Summit webinar series. This focusing on financial coaching best practices. This is Phil Schuman from Indiana University, the Director of Financial Literacy, as well as the co-chair and co-founder of the Higher Education Financial Wellness Summit. Clearly, I'm here just to kind of do the selfless, shameless, whatever you want to say, self-promotion of the summit coming up here next summer. So the 2019 Higher Education Financial Wellness Summit will be held July 14th through 16th, 2019, here in lovely southern and central Indiana, where it is currently 40 degrees, so we're a little bit above our average right now. I can promise you it'll be warmer than that next summer. But we're really excited to have everybody down here for the summit next year. We hope you'll join us. As part of the summit next year, we will be having the student experience, which is a one-day pre-conference kind of pre-summit session for students that are trying to deliver financial education or try and bring financial wellness to their campus. So that will be on July 13th, so the day before the summit. So if you have students that are interested, have them check that out. We're trying to get as many students to be a part of that as we possibly can. If you're interested about some of the key dates that are coming up for the summit next year, rest assured you haven't missed anything yet. We tend to be a little bit late to the game with this kind of stuff because we want to make sure that we have everything in order. So January 14th of next year, the call for proposals will open. Then on January 30th, that is when registration will open. We will have the pricing for registration coming up here in the next couple weeks. So just stay tuned, and you can visit our website, hefwa2019.org, to learn what it's going to be there. The call for proposals will close about 2 months after it opens, so March 15th, 2019. And then if you submitted a proposal, we will send you out a notification by April 5th, letting you know whether or not you will be presenting here next year at the summit. But we really want to have as many people here as we possibly can. Should be a great event. We're especially excited because here next year at Indiana, we are celebrating our bicentennial for the university. So we're trying to pull out all the stops to get everybody to come here and have a great time. If you have any more questions or want any more information about 2019, feel free to just visit www.hefwa2019.org. Also, feel free to reach out to us at info@hefwa.org. We're happy to answer any questions you may have. But just stay tuned. In January, we should be announcing the registration costs, the keynote speakers, pretty much everything that you probably want to know about the summit will be coming out in January. So stay tuned for that. But with that, I want to turn it over to kind of the webinar master. Jimena, I don't know what to call you, but I'm going to turn it over to you to have everybody get the ground rules.
Thank you, Phil. I like the webinar master title.
There we go.
My name is Jimena Waco, as Phil has mentioned. I am a member of the advisory board for the HEFWA group, and I help oversee the webinar series that we bring out to you year-round. So before we get started, maybe I just want to go over a couple of logistical things. First off, you probably all have access to the group chat. So during the presentation, if you feel like you have any questions or anything that comes up, please feel free to submit your questions as the presentation is happening. I will be monitoring that chat group and I will be gathering those questions, and at the end of the presentation we'll have some time to review those questions. If for some reason we run out of time, we can make sure to follow up with an email with those answers. And if there's any logistical stuff, I'll try to answer that through the chat group as well. But if there's any content or questions to the presenters, we'll hold off until the end, and we'll just try to go over all those Q&As at the end. If, as Phil mentioned, if you can please make sure that you are muted, that would be great. I think that's pretty much it as far as logistical items. We will follow up with the recording and the slides after the presentation is over. So stay tuned and keep an eye out for an email from us with the recording and the slides. So I will now pass it on to our presenters from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We have Sarah Baton-Kahn and Pam McClelland. So Sarah joined the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection's Office of Community Affairs in 2012. The office focuses on low-income and other economically vulnerable consumers. Sarah currently co-manages the CFPB's Financial Coaching Initiative, as well as the Credit and Consumer Reporting Portfolio for Community Affairs. And Pam is the Senior Financial Educator on the Service Member Affairs team at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In that role, she currently works to identify opportunities to develop strategies to improve the financial education and consumer protection measures for the military and veteran community. So I will now welcome Pam and Sarah to take it over and talk about the financial coaching best practices.
Here we go. So,
okay, can everybody see that? All right, I'll hope so. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jimena. So Pam and I co-manage the Financial Coaching Initiative for the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, and we're so thrilled to be with you all today virtually. Thank you for joining. We're excited to talk about our program that we've been working on for several years now.
All our lives.
It seems it's definitely a labor of love. And so we're going to do kind of tag team. I'll cover some of the slides, and Pam will also cover some of the slides. We'll go back and forth. We're happy to address any questions you have. We might not see them in the chat right, as we're presenting, but we will definitely open it up for questions later. Or Jimena, you're welcome to interrupt us if there's a question that pops up. I'm gonna make you work a little bit at the beginning, and then that's it. I promise. Because I have two questions. Yes, one is, it's a yes or no question, and I understand that in the, there's a little tab called Managing Participants, I think, where you can answer a yes or no question. So it's a yes or no question. And the question is, oh, go ahead. Okay. Someone was asking a question because we're getting some feedback. The question is, are you familiar with financial coaching? Easy yes or no question. And then the second follow-up question requires you to go into your chat function and to tell us how you're either working with coaches, how you know about it, maybe you're referring students to coaching. We would just love to know a little bit more about, how you're working with coaches or coaching programs. And while you do that, let me just give you our standard federal government disclaimer. I'm not going to read it. And I will hand it over to Pam to talk a little bit about why the Bureau decided to engage in this work.
Great. As a matter of fact, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So, financial coaching, a lot of people say, what's the difference between coaching and counseling, those kind of things. So when we were putting the program together, and you'll hear a little later on how that all came together, but it was sort of like, I thought back to my days. I've been an accredited financial counselor since 2000, and I did it for many years in the Department of Defense, in an Air Force base. I'm retired Air Force, but as a civilian, I did it there. And to be quite honest, back in those days, a squadron commander might have a crew chief or a security policeman that was having some financial issues, and they really couldn't afford to be without him, so they would call over and say, Pam, get this guy in your office and fix him. I need him fixed fast. So quite frankly, I would develop their plan and make sure they followed it, but to be very honest, Once we were done, I'm sure the behavior started again. So we knew when we were going to spend a lot of time with veterans on this program that that would not be the way to go. So we started looking at different coaching projects, and we went and looked at different trainings, and the one we came up with was Sage Financial, which is associated with the AFCPE. And the reason we did that is because when you're out there on your own, veterans, and you don't have somebody over your shoulder, it's up to you. It's your plan. You develop it. Now, of course, you know, there's some rules to this, which was why we loved coaching, because there is accountability, but basically it's not on the service provider, and it works so much better. I went through the coaching training myself, and it's totally changed how I run my practice, I will tell you right now, and it's much more effective. So we're really glad we went with that model.
So in addition to sort of understanding that the model would meet the needs of our respective, you know, the clients that we were targeting. So Pam, coming from service members, obviously was focused on veterans. And then I work in the Office of Community Affairs, which focuses on vulnerable consumers. We knew that you know, the methodology, the approach would be very effective for those audiences in particular, and, you know, as well as many other audiences. But we also knew that financial coaching is effective. Oh, sorry, let me go to the next slide.
There we go.
So,
Sarah and Pam, it just looks like we're also not on presenter mode yet.
Oh,
really? Okay, so.
You know, we can see your slides, but it's not on full presenter mode.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry, everyone. Give me 1 second. Let me know. It's always the technology, right?
Yeah.
And of course, when we did the run through, all this worked.
Yeah, it went perfect.
It went really perfectly.
Yeah. Okay.
Only everybody could have seen that.
I know, we were really good then.
Okay, I'm just going to try to share again, start over.
Okay, good.
And then.
I think you may, we tried last time flipping the screen. There we
go. And then changing the display settings, and that should do it.
Okay.
There we go.
Is that good, guys?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right,
All right,
great.
sorry about that.
Yeah.
So we have these nice slides, but now we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, so our sister office, the Office of Financial Education, commissioned rigorous research. We did a randomized controlled trial evaluation on financial coaching in 2 locations in the country. And it showed, and I won't go into all the results, I do have a couple listed here. We have a huge full Urban Institute evaluation if you're interested. We also did a couple of briefs on the results, so you're welcome to look at those, and I'm also happy to send those around afterwards. But basically what we learned was that financial coaching is very effective in helping clients achieve both objective and subjective improvements in their financial situation. Our Office of Financial Education also embarked on a really rigorous, I think impressive, groundbreaking body of work around financial well-being. So in our field, it had kind of the goals of what we were doing in terms of financial education, financial literacy had never really been defined and not defined and studied in a rigorous way. And so we embarked on that in the early days of the Bureau. And now we have this great body of work around financial well-being. And we have a couple of different scales that practitioners and those researchers in the field can use related to well-being as well as financial skills. So, but what I was going to say is that we know that coaching is also effective in terms of improving one's financial well-being. So this was very exciting to us that we were able to provide a large national program that could be responsive to this very effective intervention.
Absolutely. And you know, before we talk about gaps, the financial well-being scale that goes with the research that we developed here is a practitioner's dream. You know, for so long there was no way you could really measure or determine causality with all of the wonderful work you were doing with the consumer. So, you know, if you want to hear more about that, just get a hold of Sarah and I, because I'll tell you, it's the Department of Defense practitioners are loving it, because you can prove to your funder or your champions or your advocates or the people that are opposing what you're doing, why it's so important. So, you know, we knew there was a gap in service for financial coaching, especially in the veteran community, I will tell you, because while you're in uniform, every single installation has a personal financial manager, and they're accredited, they're an AFC, accredited financial counselor. But when you get that 214, those discharge papers, you walk out that gate and it's over. And so when you're trying to translate into the civilian world exactly what the financial obstacles and what terms mean, and even with your new paychecks and what you're trying to get, buy healthcare, you're trying to do all of these things, there's no objective independent source, or very little, I should say, because there are people out there doing some work as well. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that want to help, and I'm using air quotes around help. Well, what they really want to do is sell mutual funds and insurance policies to service members and veterans. They're definitely a target because they know that you're kind of, you know, finding your way when you first get out. So veterans often need that support when they're navigating, and not just when they walk out the gate, but, you know, at different times, sometimes just a little bit of information, sometimes some, you know, pretty extensive counseling, depending on what's going on. So we found that the coaching really, when you get that training as a financial counselor, you really learn about the flexibility. We say you meet the clients where they are. If they come to you with a crisis mode, that's not the time to say, so, you know, tell us about your goals. You want to help them with that crisis right away. But plant the seeds that you have other skill sets that can help them with the financial aspects of their goals. So we really feel like we were able to put our program into a place of need.
Yeah, and then on the, Pam did a great job of talking about the veteran side of things, and on the economically vulnerable consumer side of things, often vulnerable consumers have little access to expert financial support that's designed to help them meet their specific goals. And so, and yeah, actually many vulnerable consumers are in some kind of transition, and often a very difficult transition or life situation. Maybe it's homelessness, maybe it's domestic violence, loss of a job. So they may be trying to get ahead, but life is kind of keeps setting them back a little bit. And so we really liked the approach of coaching because it effectively equips consumers who are in transition with the tools and supports they need to be successful. But like, again, as Pam said, meeting them where they are in that journey.
So here's some of the background of the project. So Sarah in her office and her colleagues came up with this idea. So when they went to brief our then director, my boss, Holly Petraeus, you might recognize that last name, who used to run the Office of Service Member Affairs here, she was sitting there in the room, and Rich Cordrea was our director, said, so Holly, you think we should be doing this with veterans? And she said, absolutely, and Pam McClellan would love to do it. So from that point in May 2015, it took over our lives, and we're really, really glad it did. I will tell you that. You know, when we first put this together on the veteran side, we were targeting recently transitioned. We used that term. We thought, you know, somebody that's been out just a couple of years or just getting out. Boy, did we find that the need for all different categories of veterans was very prominent, whether it was like a Cold War vet like me, who was maybe going into a second career, or Vietnam vets that maybe their transition didn't go so well the first time, and they're coming out of homeless status perhaps, or just getting back on their feet from whatever challenges they had. Our coaches have been able to work with them. We've even had World War II clients, and that's especially rewarding for our coaches. So there's all different kinds of populations, and you know, our population started to overlap a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a couple of the more basic stuff so Pam mentioned we launched in May 2015. We currently have 61 trained professional financial coaches on the ground in 60 host sites, which are in a diverse set of nonprofits or government agencies around the country. I believe we're in something like 36 states. And
right, we'll share that map with you in just a little bit.
Yeah, and so federal, CFPB as a federal government agency cannot, we don't have grant making authority. So when we put money out, we have to do it via contract. And so while Pam and I manage from the government level and the high level contract level, we have a really fantastic group of contractors on the ground who are managing the day-to-day, providing the training, we have a third-party researcher in Urban Institute, and we have other kind of vendors handling like the IT pieces, the outcome tracking, et cetera. And then, so also, we launched, the idea was that the coaches would offer in-person financial coaching on the ground via their host sites. Very quickly, we learned that that's a limited model, and so we piloted a telecoaching kind of option for people who either didn't want to come to meet in person with a coach, or who, physically weren't able to, or just maybe there was a place where we didn't have a coach serving clients. And also sometimes, I'll give you an example, our coach in Mississippi works for the Mississippi Center for Justice, and she effectively serves the entire state of Mississippi. So as you can imagine, that's not really sustainable if you think about the model where someone's meeting someone in person. So, and for all those reasons, this telecoaching line has been a great resource for us to have to provide to consumers when they can't or prefer not to meet one-on-one in person with a financial coach.
So a little bit more about why we focused on veterans. You can see that a whole lot of folks leave active duty every year. And a lot of times, maybe a lot of them go to schools. You may be coming into contact with quite a few, and sometimes they're mature students. Sometimes they've only been in a year. Perhaps it didn't go well, but they still have their GI Bill. So those kind of things are great opportunities for coaching. They're teachable moments, if you will. They're coachable moments, and it helps us steer the veterans away from the products that are being targeted to them. So we're really excited. Department of Defense does a really wonderful job. They have a transition assistance program. I'm on their committee that helps do the curriculum. But there's so much coming at a veteran when you are transitioning, that whether you just need that job, you don't really focus on all the different aspects, and sometimes the financial doesn't get the attention it needs. I often would get a call back from some of our transitioning members, and they'd say, I thought I had my dream job till I got my first paycheck, and what the heck are all these categories that they're taking money from me? And I said, well, I knew they kind of heard about this stuff, but when there's just such a lot going on, and it's not necessarily the best time to teach. So we complement the DoD Transition Assistance Program because we know what they did give to them, and sometimes we can even refer them back to the transition budget they did, and it kind of gives us a place to start. So we've had a lot of progress with all different kind of categories, and we'll share with you some of the things that they were interested in what their goals look like.
Okay, so this is just a map of our locations around the country, and yeah, we're in 60 sites in 37 states. And so we often get the question, how did you decide where to go, which host sites to pick, which states and communities to go into? And so we did slightly different processes, and we'll explain our different processes. So on the economically vulnerable consumer side, we knew that we only had about 20 dedicated locations that would serve predominantly low-income consumers. And then, we do have a couple hybrid sites that serve both, and some coaches who are veteran-focused that end up serving some low-income consumers too. But with only 20, it was really hard to figure out, where do we go? How do I make this decision? So we did first a data-driven approach, and then we did a competitive process. Our contractor had some great data geeks who pulled together, we worked together to pick what kinds of metrics would to us signify a vulnerable consumer who could benefit from coaching. And so we kind of created an algorithm that smushed all that data together and then generated a number of communities around the country. And then we also further sorted by sort of metropolitan, micropolitan, rural, so that we would have, and then regions of the country, so that we would end up with a diverse set of communities. And from there, we went into the community and did a competitive process, asking nonprofits predominantly, but we also have some government agencies to submit kind of a proposal to us and then do an interview process. And from there, we selected our 20 what we call EVC sites. Sorry, and I'll just mention that they're a diverse set. in addition to like being nonprofits and government, they, in terms of their roles, they do everything from social services, job training, domestic violence, legal services, kind of like the whole range of types of community-based services. Okay.
So the veteran selection was not as scientific. You would think, and people ask me all the time, why didn't you put them in veteran centers, which is part of the VA process, and they're out in the communities, and that was the goal. We had met with the man that was running the veteran centers for VA at the time when we first started, and he was all for it, a big champion for us. Well, then we went through that long contracting process that Sarah was sharing with you, and by the time we landed on our contractor, our champion over there had retired. And they were going through some challenges of their own. Some of them were, in the Washington Post, and so they weren't set up to take that on at the time. So good thing, we were doing some work with the Department of Labor and the VETS office and also the EVR office. And they said, in our American Job Centers, we have a Gold Card program, which focuses on veterans. And we said, well, have we got something for you? And when they heard about our coaches, they said, let me put out feelers for which American Job Centers would be willing, because they have to give up the desk, a phone, a place to work, and see who would take it. Well, we got a wonderful response from many of them that volunteered. So when we took the volunteers, there were more than the number of coaches we had. We then applied some science. We looked and see where the most veterans were, closest, proximity to military installations, those kind of things. And that's how we selected which American Job Centers, and they're called all different things in all different states, where the coaches would go. So that's kind of how that happened. So this surprised me. I thought the veteran client goals would be way different than the vulnerable consumers. And, when it turns out, they were very similar. Many of them needed credit and debt. That was huge. When you're in the military, people will throw credit cards at you because they know that you have a steady income. And then when you get out, you still have all these credit card debts, and perhaps you don't have that steady income anymore. So, and basic money management was also important. But behind each one of these categories are not the real story is, why did you want to fix your credit? Maybe it was somebody that wanted to start their own business, or they were frustrated because it was keeping them from taking a job that they could have maybe interned in, but they needed a higher paycheck, or, perhaps buying that first civilian home was the goal. So that's why they needed their credit score up, or to pay their debt down, or to get their act together with being able to manage what was coming in and what was going out. So behind each one of these words, this savings and debt and credit, were life goals and dreams. And that's the thing that I think one of our takeaways for this was, we probably would have captured more of that. So we're still kind of working and data mining as we wrap this project up, and so that we'll be able to give more insight into that as well.
Yeah, this slide is probably more aptly titled as top financial client goals, or top client financial goals, because as Pam said, when they meet with our coaches, the coaches are trained to not talk about financial goals, or they're trained to talk about life goals, and then the coach figures out or helps them figure out what are the intermediate steps, kind of those intermediate financial steps that you need to take to get to that ultimate goal. And what we're not struggling with, but one of our challenges coming out of the program is to really make that tie-in clear, because what we've seen in our field, not just with financial coaching, but the broader field of financial coaching and counseling, is we end up focusing very much so on the metric-driven, outcome-driven side on the financial piece, which is, I understand why there's reasons for that, but what we're losing sight of is when you get to the secret sauce of coaching and why it's so effective is because it's tied to those life goals. It's one of our interesting challenges that we're
absolutely, because really we've seen if you keep your eye on the life goal, then you're motivated to do the hard stuff. The budget that's so boring and so horrible. I mean, I'm the same way. I hate them, but it's for me to reach my life goals and for our consumers to reach their life goals, you know, you have to do a little of that. And one size doesn't fit all. And that's the beauty of coaching. So even though we know with funders and, you know, people that are hopefully going to champion programs, that they do need to measure something, you know, and sometimes I refer to them as the bean counters, I probably shouldn't, but we need to satisfy them as well. So you can see that we used a lot of ways to measure things. The financial capability scale was one of them. And Sarah, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So first and foremost, we have just basic sort of number of clients served and then number of sessions. So coaching usually often will mean several sessions. The client will meet with the coach because it is about progress towards goals, which are often longer term goals. So the client will meet with the coach over time, and so that's why you see a difference between the number of clients versus number of sessions. This is definitely a conservative estimate because we know our coaches will only track if it's like, at least 45 minutes, if it's often they'll get text messages and they'll respond and they don't count that kind of stuff. So think of this as very conservative estimates in terms of numbers of people served. And we have seen a steady growth over time, which anyone who's worked in programs knows that the kind of word of mouth effect and how important that is with any program. So in the early days, it was kind of a trickle, and then it got, it's just grown more rapidly, and our coaches are at the point now where they see a lot of clients. And then we track financial goals. So we were talking about the importance of financial goals. We know that 93% of our coaching clients have some kind of positive goal status, which is they've established their goals, they've made progress towards their goals, or they've accomplished their goals. And that's really important because, as we talked about, it's really the life goal that will drive the clients versus kind of just financial goals. And then we track along what we call the financial capability scale. This was developed by the University of Wisconsin Center for Financial Security because our program predates our financial well-being scale that we released. And so we started using this scale, which was kind of the best thing that we had at the time. But what we show is, and I'll spare you from having to do the math here, but basically it fluctuates, but somewhere between 75 to 85% of our clients experience positive gains along the financial capability scale as measured by these sets of questions. And then we also track separately, not something that we share publicly, but we track the coach's developmental goals for themselves. So we know that so much of coaching is really putting so much into the coach, him or herself, really preparing them to meet with any client that comes in the door. So that requires a lot of training, professional development, ongoing support, master coaching. So they have goals for themselves, and then they are tracked along their own progress, which I think is really important from a programmatic perspective. And then finally, I mentioned Urban Institute is doing a third-party evaluation, which is kind of like an accountability measure because the federal government has made such a large investment in this program. We want to make sure that we have that kind of independent, organization looking at what we're doing.
So we learned a lot. So that's what we hope to be able to share by some of the reports that we're going to leave behind and the things we're working on now, so other people, when they try to replicate this or do something like it, they don't have to learn the lessons we've learned. But I'll tell you, some of the ones, we are so glad that we went with the 2 certifications because it gave our coaches the skill set to truly operate on a full spectrum of needs from the clients. And because the organization AFCPE, Association for Counseling, Planning, and Education, because they have a rigorous program where the training is rigorous, the CEU commitment is rigorous, there's an ethics component. So it's truly, where we sent these coaches out, they were true professionals. So we made sure that we gave them continuing training because we wound up with some coaches that were in areas that were experiencing natural disasters. So we needed to be able to do some training on how to respond to a client that's in that kind of crisis and that kind of stress. We had some cohorts of some of the vulnerable coaches that they were in legal aids. Yeah. So there was some very unique things to that cohort. And as they started to arise, we would give them continuing, or the contractor would give them some wonderful training to respond to that. And then we also had master coaches, which supported the coaches through the whole time. So anytime they came up with something that, you know, they were a little puzzled about, they couldn't handle, they could immediately have that backup and support. So we were able to help them along the way in those instances also.
Yeah, and so also to add on to what Pam's saying, the importance of integration, so being really thoughtful about how coaches, because they are mainly in host sites, so they're functioning out of other existing organizations. So thinking about how that works, how the goals align, whether or not leadership's on board, whether or not the frontline staff in those existing organizations are bought into the model and understand what exactly the coach does, because our coaches rely on, you know, internal referrals, external referrals, the buy-in of that staff. So being really thoughtful about that, and then also being willing to know, kind of get into that flexibility piece, willing to admit when things aren't working well. We did move coaches out of some host sites and put them into other host sites when it wasn't working. We tried hard to make it work, but in some cases it was not working.
Right.
And then outreach was really important. In the early days, I kind of alluded to this, but when the coaches first started, they didn't have much credibility because they were brand new. And so they had to work really hard on developing their outreach skills, their kind of personality or personal outreach skills, as well as they needed marketing tools to use. There was a lot of things that we learned related to that.
Yeah.
And then also introducing new ideas such as telecoaching. We started introducing hybrid sites that would focus on both populations. And then we also tried to more strategically connect our coaching program to other Bureau resources. So we have a number of Bureau tools and programs out there, and just being more intentional on how they connect with one another and talk to one another and kind of support each other's goals.
You know, I'm going to touch on that outreach a little bit, especially in the veteran community, because they're so used to the veterans being targeted. I call them the gatekeepers. They're the people that run the veteran service organizations and the people that, you know, try to prevent veterans from getting ripped off. We had to prove ourselves to them. Nobody knew who the, you know, CFPB, and then we, you know, BCFP and whatever you are, you know, who are you, and why is this free? You must be selling something, and why should I trust you? Why should I send my veterans to you? So that took a lot of time to make those connections. And also, we didn't hire these people to be outreach professionals. We hired them in the early part of the program to be coaches. Well, we quickly found out that they also needed to have outreach skills. So like Sarah said, we trained up the people we had, but then as we started having turnover, we attended to outreach skills when we were hiring, and we saw an absolute increase. As a matter of fact, our quota, if you will, and I hate that word, but we had a hard time our first year. Our second year was so successful, we made up for all the deficit we had in our first year, and you know, by the time we end this thing, we're going to absolutely surpass all the goals that we set for it. So we're really pleased with that. So it's not all about numbers, though. These are some of the testimonials we had. You know, they're great. When you think that somebody was looking at their challenges as tall as an Empire State Building in that first quote, and of course, paying off credit cards. You know, look at that second quote. It was such a relief for that to happen. And that third one, I'm sure, was a service member that was stationed over in England, because he said, this is a bloody miracle. So you pick stuff up when you're over there. But, you know, it's funny because that last one really tells a good story, you know, about what a coach can do. And I think that encapsulates so many things, you know, their goals. They help me deal with my snags, because this isn't like life coaching. You know, these coaches need to have subject matter expertise, so we made sure they had what they could, but they also had to be able to have a good handle on their coaching skills. And when they came together, this is the kind of thing that happens.
So we've learned a lot.
Yeah.
We've made a very large investment in the coaching field, both in terms of the research as well as our program. And so we are actually moving towards the end of our program. Our program will end March 29th. And so we've started to think about how we can share all that we've learned over the years with the broader field. And because we know we've seen the value of coaching, and we want to see how it can continue to grow and be supported, you know, throughout the country, and also supportive of other programs where you don't initially think of coaching or hasn't been implemented or integrated in the past. So some of the things we've done thus far in terms of advancing the field is we hosted a symposium last year on financial coaching and advancing the field. So it was April 2017, and we brought together a number of researchers and leaders. I'll talk about that more in a second. But then we also, excuse me, next year after March, we plan on publishing at least a couple of reports coming out of our program itself. And so that was the beginning of the body of work, and then we'll kind of continue that moving forward. And we're open for ideas too. If anyone has ideas about what we should explore and focus on, we're always open. So again, the symposium, we brought together leaders, researchers, funders to identify insights from across financial coaching programs, not really just ours, but really to bring together a broader group. And the focus and the goal was to ensure the delivery of high quality coaching. And ultimately that's to, help consumers achieve financial well-being. So these are some of the discussions that we had, like the current state of the field, the best practices, continued challenges, and potential next steps. And then we also broke out into to groups to further dissect and brainstorm and prioritize around financial coach competencies to ensure quality, kind of the key programmatic elements that are needed for successful coaching, and then also the research needs to ensure impact. And out of this, we produced a report that you can find on our website, and I'm also happy to send it around. And then the next couple of slides kind of go into more detail about what we see as, important financial coaching competencies that's here. And again, this is all in that report. So some things are not, too super surprising, like, financial content knowledge, but some of them were like, probably you all can appreciate data collection and technology skills. Some of the things we learned, like the outreach, engagement, marketing skills. Yeah. But there's a lot of kind of what I call soft skills that are really important. So things that are a little bit harder to train on, but are so key to ensuring a really trusting, important coaching relationship. Pam, do you want to add anything to this?
Absolutely. And we started attending to skills at the interview stage also. It wasn't as important in the beginning. We were the contractor was leaning a little bit to somebody that had been in accounting or had been, I call spreadsheet folk, and a lot of times they're so different than their clients. And so we started looking at people that would be more apt to coach and really had a wide range of communicative skills and were culturally responsive, as well as knowing what to do with that spreadsheet when it's appropriate. So, but I'll tell you, the people, the more behavioral the coach was, the more they hated our data collection system. They didn't want to take the time putting the numbers in. So when we developed that's another lesson learned. The more you can make it friendly to your practitioners, the better off you are, because they want to spend their time with the client. They don't want to spend their time counting things.
And the next slide, service delivery elements, get that kind of the programmatic stuff that are necessary. Strong pipeline for clients, strong referral partnerships, a lot of stakeholder ownership, and we mentioned already the data collection. And we also talked about that client-centered approach, so really putting the client first and then focusing on what you need to do to meet the client where he or she is. That's very fundamental to coaching.
Yeah, which is really hard when it comes to that, some of the coaches, because they used to be in the client, let me fix you mode. And so learning we have to unlearn that. And it was really, really successful once we did.
And then we had a breakout group focused on suggested future research.
Yeah.
And that's listed here. Okay, so I kind of mentioned our next steps is kind of further diving into some of the things we learned at the symposium, really thinking about lessons learned from our current initiative, and then we've been thinking about them across these different categories, if you will. So there's like actual program needs, there's funding needs, and then there's community national level, more like the field building work. The key thing it's probably come across, a key theme for us is fostering the professionalization of the field. We know that in many cases, financial coaching has grown up as like a little bit like the Wild West, where somebody can be trained as a coach for 2 hours and then they're deployed out with not any oversight, master coaching, ethical component,
right?
All of that. And our fear is that you can actually do more harm than good in those scenarios, and we don't think that veterans or low-income people deserve subpar services. We want to make sure all consumers get a basic, professional kind of experience with a financial coach or counselor.
Absolutely.
And this is a picture of us
There they
and our
are.
coaches.
There's the coaches.
And also
And our contractors.
and our contractors, our amazing team. And our contact information is here too, our email.
Yes, and we welcome you to contact us if you have any questions or you want to hear more about something. Please feel free to do that.
And then here is our dedicated financial coaching website, where you'll find, or a webpage rather, I'm sorry, off of the CFPB website. And we have all of our coaches are there, as well as the reports that I mentioned.
Yes. So we're absolutely open to any questions you have now that you don't want to save for later. So if you want to let us know what's on your mind, please do.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Pam. That was a great presentation, a lot of very helpful information. Something that definitely resonated with me was your intention to tie your coaching to life goals and not necessarily financial goals. That's definitely something that I will try to apply with the work that I do and the coaching that we do with our students at least in my institution. There were a couple of other questions that popped up in the group chat. One question was around who exactly could benefit from your services. Do you strictly limit that to veterans or any other groups or extensions that could potentially still get that assistance?
Right. So in the veteran community, you don't even have to have, a card or say who you are. We don't check anything, but you're more than welcome. Like I said, there were student veterans. We have a lot of work with student veterans. I wish we had done more actually with student veterans. And also a lot of veteran homeless populations we worked with. We worked with folks that were looking for work and they wanted to make sure that they knew what they needed in their next salary. We also, veterans move away many times from where they exited the service. So cost of living, whether they were trying to pick where to live, those kind of things. So we never put parameters around the veteran population. I mean, we've had folks that were trying to figure out a little bit about their retirement if they had they were transitioning for the second time. Our coaches were able to give them, or at least refer them, if it was something that wasn't in their lane. And we really stress that with our coaches, that you stay in your lane. You're not doing taxes. Even if they came to us from some other, if they were lawyers, we have some accountants, we said, that's not what you're doing in this program. You're doing financial coaching. So they would refer if something was, not under what we trained them to do.
Great, thank you. And specifically, the question also was around ROTC, the ROTC program. Would you say that those students would also be able to?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Matter of fact, we really want the ROTC people because my folks that I know in the Department of Defense would love people to be a little more prepared once they got in. So that's a perfect time to coach somebody as an ROTC.
Great, thank you. Another question that came up. So Sarah, you presented some really strong metrics for the client sort of progress and success in their coaching. Are those, and this is just maybe more for clarification, you might have already mentioned this, but are those self-reported after a series of sessions or after just one session? And also a follow-up question to that, what tool or software do you use to track those client outcomes?
So we do ask them over each time they come back. So we only have the data for those who come back, obviously. It is self-reported along the financial capability scale. And then we have a bunch of other questions we ask along, like more demographic, biographical kind of information. So we have that information too about our clients. In terms of the software, we use something called Oracle. And it's not an intuitive tool, and I don't necessarily, well, not that I don't recommend it, but we had to build it from scratch. And it's a long story, but in the early days of the Bureau, when we were like kind of assessing our needs based on like externally, what do we need for the program, but also internally, what could we get away with as a federal government agency trying to do this work? There's a lot of cybersecurity rules that we have to abide by. And so we had this system for our consumer response function at the Bureau already. So we basically took that system and then we modified it for our coaching program, but in effect, had to build it from scratch versus using one of the more traditional off-the-shelf ones that are designed more for this type of stuff.
You know, and also I want to add to that, we had also a category, we called them one and done. For example, if a service member or a veteran came in and said, look, I have these 3 jobs to pick from, and I don't know about the areas, the cost of living, how do I do a salary comparison, can you help me with this? And many times in an hour period, the coach just, you know, it was done. The goal was to come in and give them, they wanted information of where they should, which job to select, and they were able to do it. And there was no need for a follow-up. It would have been odd for a follow-up on that. So we also try to get our coaches to make sure at the end they'd say, okay, you came in today to do blah, blah, blah. Do you feel like, you know, we've taken care of so you can, you know, the goal that you had for this or the task that you had? And if they say yes, then we encourage them to put that in that, you know, the goal was in progress and it was made for that point.
Perfect. Thank you so much for answering that question. The other question that came up was around telecoaching. Do you, I personally find that fascinating. I'll probably make that my goal for my next semester to implement telecoaching with our students. Would you say if there's anybody that would be wanting to try that out, any challenges or, you know, the one thing that you would share for us to know? And also, how did you supervise the coaches in a remotely setting like that?
So I'll take that first one.
Sure,
So, so telecoaching is extremely effective. I always am an advocate for it. You know, many years ago when I was a personal financial manager for the Pentagon, the embassies fell under us. So I did a lot of telecounseling at the time with folks that were at the embassy, and we would do it on the phone, or, you know, technology wasn't advanced now. But veterans especially, the VA does mental health counseling over the phone to be a teller, and they have amazing results. And so we trained our coaches, though, before we opened up the telecoaching line, because there are things that, you know, you need to attend to. There are different minor things that you do a little differently, but not that much different. And I'll tell you, especially with younger consumers, they're savvy. You know, they want a Zoom call or even on a text, or, you know, we call it tele, but we're, you know, all kinds of medias fall under that. So we think that it's really been great. And a lot of folks, you know, they can't get to you. And we didn't have that many coaches, so we were able to open that up. And the second part of the question was, what was the end part?
Oh, around supervision.
Oh, yeah. You want to talk about
so
that?
we didn't directly supervise our coaches. Our contractor did that, and we have a really great contractor team, and they're based many of them are based remotely around the country, and they figured out ways to use the Zoom platform, as well as, you know, kind of go out to do site visits. And Pam and I did a lot of site visits too, into the community to meet with the coach as well as the host site. And each host site had like a host site supervisor who our contractor relied on too, to help be the eyes and ears on the ground to ensure that the coach was, you know, providing the services that we expected him or her to be providing. And then separately, so that was kind of like day-to-day, like, you know, our expectations around basic job duties. And then separately, we have a master coach who has been providing master coaching supervision. And if that's what you're getting into, it kind of depended on the person. You know, some of the newer coaches needed more supervision. They may have needed practice sessions. So maybe they were meeting with other clients, other coaches to help practice. Maybe they had specific questions about client issues, or, you know, so the master coaching was a very helpful tool. And then we also did a lot of effort to connect our coaches on the ground to each other, especially so that they wouldn't feel like isolated as they are, so they could bounce ideas off of each other as well.
Yeah, and also our host sites, they would get feedback from the consumers too, because they were offering all kinds of services. And they would include feedback on the financial coaches. So if something wasn't going well, we would know about it right away. And that was very helpful. So there were a number of ways we could do what you would call supervision, but we felt like we hired them with experience many times, and even if they didn't, by the time we got them through their training and all of the ways that we had to check in, that we had pretty good oversight to make sure the quality of the program was on track, not just the quantity of people we wanted. We really tried to focus on quality with this.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And so now, just in the interest of time, we'll have one last question. Somebody mentioned that they're a financial coach volunteer and they would like to learn more, but as you may know, there's an investment that goes with belonging to and getting the certification through the AFCP. Do you know of any alternatives for people to maybe have that covered in some way?
Well, before you look at alternatives, I would highly recommend that you contact AFCPE. They have scholarship programs. They have entered into contracts with employers and also some universities to be able to offer the certification program at a reduced rate. And you get the benefit of the credential and all of those other things before you go for something that doesn't give you a piece of paper, as you will, you know, because we should be as credentialed, in my opinion, as, you know, the medical profession, the legal profession, you know, people should be able to see who you are by what your credentials are, in my opinion. So I would really encourage you to get Rebecca Wiggins, who is the director of the AFCPE. She will do everything she can to try to make it affordable for people.
And then in addition to that, the Center for Financial Security did a survey, they have like a survey of all of the different financial coaching training programs. But we just, you know, we're not gonna, you know, tell you which to pick or like how to shop around for that, but be mindful of just the components. So we did this work on like understanding what coach competencies are, and just be aware of which one you select, because the Center for Financial Security just, you know, published something that says, right, here are all the options, yep, here's a general sense of the cost. But we just encourage you to look at the ethical components, look at the different, components of what the training includes and that sort of thing.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah and Pam, again, for an amazing presentation. It looks like you posted your individual contact info in the group chat as well, but that's also in the slides, and we will be sharing the slides and the recording of this webinar later on. So thank you, and thanks everybody for joining the webinar. Please stay tuned for for more information on our January webinar that will be coming up, and happy holidays to everybody. Thank you again, Pam and Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.